right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan, and I'm the moderator of this last panel, Quantum Computing, AI, and Emerging Tech. So we're at a critical juncture where the pace of technology innovation is really picking up, transforming industries and really the way we live and work. So how do we ensure that the rewards of innovation are equitably shared while also managing the very real risks that come with rapid technological change? So we heard this morning AI was a priority or topic at 2018 G7, and now this year at this G7, now quantum is also added to that list. So I'm thrilled to be joined by outstanding panel experts here who bring deep insight in from quantum science, technologies, and also AI. So together we'll explore bold ideas for shaping a future where quantum technologies may bring extraordinary opportunities for the world's economy while managing genuine risk ahead, while gleaming from what's happening in the AI sector. So to start, I'll introduce our panelists briefly because the bios are already in the brochure. And then I'll pose some questions, and I'm hoping you will make about a 5-minute opening remark answering this question. So first one is Dr. Barry Sanders. Barry, say hi. So Dr. Barry Sanders is professor at University of Calgary, also scientific director of University of Calgary's Quantum City, tasked with building a quantum innovation ecosystem where quantum tech becomes a quantum solutions. Barry is also scientist mentor with the Creative Destruction Lab, including Quantum Mentor of the Year 2023. Barry is also chair of the board for Deep Tech Canada, advisor for CERN's Open Quantum Institute, and also for the Google X Prize in Quantum Computing. In addition, Barry is a proud Calgarian Albertan, and I believe being in this room brings you some memories. So Barry was a VP academics for the Student Union, and I believe that's when you met the Honorable Minister Miles McDougall. So hello, Barry. And Barry, so after the intro, I'm hoping that you will address, tell us a little more about what quantum is for the audience to set the stage. And next we have Catherine. Hello, Catherine. So Catherine is a senior advisor at the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator, GESDA, for the Open Quantum Institute, a GESDA initiative hosted by CERN, with the mission to promote global and inclusive access to quantum computing and the development of applications for the benefit of humanity. Catherine has years of experience in building strategic relationships as well as research and innovation partnerships in global quantum and AI ecosystems. And in your opening remark, I'm hoping that you can talk about why should we care about quantum. We heard a lot about energy security and economic security. So in that sense, why should we care about quantum? And finally, we have Cam. Cam is Executive Officer at AMII. Cam at Linke is a longtime leader in Canada's technology and startup community. Over the past 10 years, he has worked as a CEO, investor, community builder, product manager, software entrepreneur, academic, and developer. Whew, long list. He holds a master's degree, which was supervised by Dr. Richard Sutton and Dr. Adam White. His research, which focused on AI adapting behaviors to improve their own self-learning, has been published at top conferences. And in your opening remark, I'm hoping that you could talk about what AI is and how does it intersect with quantum. All right, Barry, we'll start with you.
Sure, okay. Thanks, Megan. Yeah, so first I'll just mention that this is International Year of Quantum. If you hadn't noticed, it's UNESCO sponsored, and University of Calgary is one of the partners supporting this International Year of Quantum that's global. Okay, so now my task is to explain quantum computing to you, and that's really hard. So, technical, it's beyond technical because I think it was Richard Feynman who once said that, he says, I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. And it's true. So I don't understand it, but there's nobody else to put on the stage who could understand it better, I would say. Okay, so quantum mechanics, the International Year of Quantum, reflects 100 years from the so-called new quantum theory. It's 125 years old from old quantum theory. And so the first thing is, I would say that quantum mechanics is kind of like the Constitution, so you guys know better than I do, but we have laws and then we have a constitution behind it. And so every natural law, everything scientific, everything is underpinned by the laws of quantum mechanics. However, for a long time, we've been safely able to relegate the laws of quantum mechanics down to a nuclear atomic molecular scale and then ignore it. So if we make a building, we build a pipeline, we don't get down to the quantum level. We know that if we went down deep enough, we need to know quantum mechanics to do it, but we're safely able to ignore. And why are we able to ignore it? And I'll explain a little bit about quantum in a moment, but first I'm going to say why we can ignore it usually. And so quantum mechanics is fragile. It means that if we try to make bigger objects than molecules, the weird things about quantum mechanics that separate it from the other sciences don't hold up. And so we're able to ignore it on that level, but we're going through a revolution in fabrication technology. So in nanotechnology, as an example, and even getting smaller than the nanoscale, we're able to build things now at chip scale. So by chip, I'm referring to computer chips. And we're now able to get quantum effects to work on computer chip scale. And this means that something that we could ignore, we can't ignore. And this radically changes the underpinning of computing and communication. So let me try to explain this briefly. If you think about a car, you can say where it is and how fast it's going, and it's meaningful to talk about the car or the moon or any other object and talk about its properties. And so in the philosophy of science, we have a notion of objectivity, that an object can be defined by the properties it has. But quantum mechanics tells us that there's something known as complementarity, that there's a trade-off between one property and another. So there's a joke. Can I tell a joke? Okay, good. So there's a joke. Werner Heisenberg, one of the originators of quantum mechanics, is driving along, and then he gets pulled over by the police, and the police officer says, "Do you know how fast you're going?" And Heisenberg says, "No." The police officer says, "You're going 100 kilometers an hour." And Heisenberg says, "Oh, now I don't know where I am." And so this is, in the quantum world, this is an example that you learn one thing, you have to forget about the other, because the reality doesn't hold up if you don't know that. And so in things that we've developed over time, so quantum is not just a new thing. Lasers, transistors, magnetic resonance imaging that's used in hospitals, superconductors, superfluids. There's many different examples that we quantum scientists own that have come up, have transformed society. Transistors underpin computers, and in a transistor, the electron has to go from one point to another through an impossible region. So not knowing where the electron is allows it to get through that forbidden region. So we have all that. But where things are going now is even the notion of logic is being transformed. So if we talk about the bit, the binary digit, as the underpinning of logic, it could be 0 or 1. But in the quantum world, you can have 0 and 1 at the same time in a superposition. And you can have a superposition of 0 and 1 in a way that constructively or destructively interferes. That all sounds very strange, but what it does allow is that if we can play around with the very logical underpinnings of computing, then it turns out that certain problems that we think are hard to solve become easy. So the first thing I'll tell you is kind of like a nuclear bomb analogy. So it's the bad news, but there's good news after. And the bad news is that all of the encryption, public key encryption, so the way that we send secret messages over the internet, the way when you put your credit card details on the internet and you trust it, is that you write down the details and then you trust that you can generate a key that's secret and then use the key to encrypt the message. This is known as public key encryption. But the problem is that a quantum computer is really good at code breaking. So in principle, if quantum computers can be built at scale, it destroys every method we have and every method we trust as a good alternative. All of it fails in the presence of quantum computers at scale. But nobody wants to build a quantum computer to break the internet, not because we're honest people, but because the secret would get out and we would change our encryption. So it's a useless result even if you want to break the internet. Where it does matter, and this gets so that's really solid, that result. But when we go to the good news side and we say, what's a quantum computer good for? Then the problem is where can it be used? And one area that we can adapt that algorithm and make use of it is things like materials, chemical simulation. So we need to design new drugs, we have to develop new materials, all those kinds of things. And a quantum computer, by being very naturally quantum mechanical, and molecules are very naturally quantum mechanical, could be used to simulate, to create new materials and new drugs and so on, in a way that instead of spending a lot of money with slow progress in wet chemistry labs doing things, it's possible that we can do things on more things. We already do synthetic chemistry on computers, but it could provide a dramatic breakthrough in being able to simulate that. When I say if, it's because I want to be very careful. There's no proof it will work. It's speculative. There's a lot of work going on it. But until we have a solid win, it's still an if. Okay, I've said enough.
Thanks, Barry. I've got no questions from the audience, so either everyone understood or you just put them away. But that's a good segue to Catherine's opening remarks. So love to hear about your work at OQI and tell us about why we should care about quantum. Maybe talk about some use cases. So why should we care?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Megan, and thank you everyone for being here and being quantum curious. Maybe we have also experts in the room. So thanks, Barry, for setting the stage and also introducing not only what the heck is quantum, but what can we do with it. They are really complex problems that today, with existing classical computing, are unsolvable or solvable, but with so much approximation that doesn't lead to a reasonable and useful answer. Some of them we're leveraging AI, machine learning, and we're going to hear about, but still there are pieces where they can work in tandem. There are others that are fully quantum mechanical, and we will need scalable, reliable quantum computers. And seeing the potential for, we had just before our panel a discussion on military use. There are definitely interest in terms of defense, in terms of positioning, navigation, timing with a lot more accuracy, thinking of magnetometers and sensors for seismology, for exploration, also for biosensing, for health exploration. And Barry, you mentioned about simulation of chemistry, so you can really accelerate, for instance, discovery of new drugs, new antibiotics. It's been since the mid-80s that there's barely any funding that is put into discovery of new antibiotics. So now we have these antimicrobial resistance that it kills everything, but it doesn't. The antibiotics are not as efficient and not targeted as we need, and then it creates more issues and globally. And also secure communication. And so these are type of applications that are interesting, with a lot of commercial application, defense application, geostrategic implications. And what we're seeing is that there's only a few countries and a few regions that have access to this early stage of the technology, and only a few that have the skilled people to explore and use it. So seeing this, we at the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator as a core in itself, looking at science diplomacy and how can we have an impact, how can we switch a little bit and focus on how this emerging technology will be impactful for humanity, for our planet, and how can we work together. And so we created, with the help of Barry Sanders as an advisor since the inception, we created this Open Quantum Institute to promote global, equitable, inclusive access to the technology, to promote exploration of applications that will be impactful, to promote building capacity globally, and to provide this neutral platform for multilateral dialogue between many nations to see where can we work together and making sure that the technology will be impactful. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. And we'll circle back on the whole potential digital divide section later. Cam, so tell us about AI and how it intersects with quantum, and feel free to share your favorite AI joke like Barry shared his.
I got no AI jokes. This is like my favorite panel ever right now because it started out one with my bio making it sound like in any way my publishing record was remotely close to Barry's. And then Barry got to explain an unexplainable subject at the nap hour of conferences, which is like 2 to 3. So this is great so far. I'm glad none of those went to me. So far so good. And then also I know very little about quantum, and I'm supposed to explain the intersection between AI and quantum. So great start so far. This is awesome. I can maybe start by maybe taking it away from the science of the two, just to say, and some of the things that we learned building out a lot of the AI community here in Canada and here in Alberta. One of the very first ones was something that Catherine mentioned there, and it was around talent. And I think it's one of the biggest things to think about, if you back up to 2012, which I think was kind of when the inflection point of AI really took off. There was a competition called ImageNet. It was basically like, can computers do as good at predicting what's in an image as humans? And up until that point, really terrible. And then there was kind of a step change in using neural networks to be able to participate in this competition. Did way better than anything before, and kind of were suddenly at par with humans. And this unlocked a lot of opportunity in artificial intelligence to be able to say, okay, well now we can actually use this in a business context and use it for quality assurance and use it for predictive maintenance, these types of things. So there was kind of this step change. And the things that we had a challenge at the time, one, first of all, was talent. Is that the people who knew and could actually do these things, there's very few of them. They were in really high demand. And specifically here in Canada, where we had pioneered a lot of the algorithms and a lot of the technology to do this, a lot of the people had left academic posts, were in industry, and so we weren't actually training that next generation of talent. So that kind of started in 2012, and Canada in 2017 recognized that this was a challenge. First country to have a national AI strategy, invest in Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton as the 3 pillars of that, with the now three Turing Award winners in each of those places as the core scientific leaders. And so I think one really big thing we learned from that was this talent piece and making sure that you're building the capacity to train the people that know how to use this technology and are going to be pioneering the future of it. So I think this is a vital piece, regardless of the technology itself. This is a vital piece going forward. Second part is around the need for compute and infrastructure to do this. Second piece that we're still pretty behind on in Canada is compute capacity for the sciences writ large, but especially for anybody doing AI and machine learning, very GPU heavy. Something that if we've kind of seen, and I know it's a question later about a little bit of a have and have not situation when it comes to large companies versus small companies. The biggest thing large companies have is they have access to compute. Now the third thing that we found, and this is something that we've both grown organically and we've now grown very intentionally with our group in the last couple of years, is that intersectional talent matters a lot. And so people who are able to sit in a domain like health or biology and be an AI researcher at the same time, these people who speak both of those languages are vital. I'm not someone, despite being on this panel, who speaks quantum and AI, so I'm not the best to be able to explain the intersection of the two. Barry could probably do a better job of it than I can. But what I can say is we found in AI that at times we'd have this dream of, we'll put computer scientists in a room, we'll put a doctor in the room together, they'll collaborate, and then all these great medical technology innovations are going to come out of it. And what we found is what we need is people like Ross Mitchell, who's in our group, who's in the Faculty of Medicine every day. He's an AI researcher. He understands what clinicians need because he speaks their language, and then he advances AI to be able to move that forward. And I think the same thing's going to need to happen at the intersection of AI and quantum. And as quantum moves into a more, a little bit out of the science, and we have more advances that allows it to be used by more businesses, the people who are able to speak quantum and speak a domain at the same time are going to be vital. So there's just some lessons that we learned along the way.
Excellent. And I'll pose the first question then. So quantum AI emerging tech innovations are moving fast, and the governments want to stay competitive, of course. So I guess the question may be touching upon the core of the technology innovation policy. How do we foster innovation without sacrificing oversight? Is there a way to design regulation that drives innovation in this high risk and high reward areas such as quantum and AI? Or is it always going to be a balancing act where regulations are always at odds with high impact innovation by creating market barriers? Barry, Cam, Catherine?
I could jump in first. Yep. Okay, so so you can see in the title of this session, it's got the emerging technologies. So part of your question, Megan, is for quantum and AI, but I think there's some really deep questions about how to further emerging dual-use technologies. So quantum and AI are both emergent in the sense that we don't really have all the answers yet. We don't know fully how to build. We don't know what the applications are. And yet there's a lot of strategic implications. So we need to find ways to develop the tech in a way that's safe, but it's good for the economy. And we don't have all the answers. Like a lot of the models we use to do that is we say, what is it going to do? And then innovate and regulate according to that. And we don't have that in the emerging area. So the two things, there's a lesson that we learn from the United States. And so in the United States, the defense agencies will put out BAAs, broad area announcements. And it's an interesting approach. So let me put it this way, that for me as a scientist, if I want to innovate, what do? Do I go for something like a government grant, see some kind of resource, and it will often be a curiosity-driven approach. So it's a hit or miss. We'll try to do what we want to do. We'll seek funding through some mechanism. But in the model that the Americans use very effectively, they say they'll offer to procure some technology that is useless, but it represents a milestone towards an ultimate goal. So a good example of that for a quantum computer is you say, well, a quantum computer at scale is a long way off, but if there's a procurement of a quantum computer at small scale that we know won't do a lot, then it means that instead of being a curiosity-driven process, it becomes a process to deliver a product that has to meet standards. And there's a lot of work going on now with standards, especially through the ISO and IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission. So I think that what I favor, and there are discussions in Canada, like the CIC, et cetera, how to create vehicles to be able to support a procurement-driven process. And I personally, I don't have the evidence, but I personally feel that's a gap that needs to be addressed. The other side about the regulation is, and I think people in the audience here know much more than I do about it, but regulation is not a bad thing for business because regulation can help to build public trust and ensure the protection. So as you heard the introduction, I help startups a lot with trying to get through from a seed stage to a venture capital stage. And the geopolitical risks matter. When you're starting to do a study of what is this startup, this venture worth, and you look at all the geopolitical risks that are going on, where the regulations kick in. Last year, it was a really interesting and puzzling instance for me. So last year, simultaneously, many countries aligned with Canada announced restrictions on a 34-qubit quantum computer. So it's basically 34 quantum bits, certain performance standards, and then suddenly there's an export control announced mysteriously. If people here know the Wassenaar arrangement, it kind of emerged out of the Wassenaar arrangement, but in a way that not all Wassenaar countries aligned with it, so there's a lot of complication to it, but there was a need for it. So eventually, through a very slow process, these export regulations emerged surprisingly, and it shook up investors, et cetera. An impact of it is to hold back some of the progress in quantum computing. And then, after that was put out, a few months later, beautiful work came out of China, which is way beyond what that policy is supposed to regulate. So it kind of shows us that even the policy making is too slow. So if the intention is to hold back certain countries, it failed to do it, but it succeeded in scaring investors and people forming companies. That's not the way to regulate. That's not the way to set up bilateral treaties to do this. To me, it just was a very flawed process, but the best that we had. On the other hand, if we have a grand strategy that regulations aren't piecemeal, but they're installed in some coherent strategy, so there's some anticipation of what's going to happen, there are better processes so we know what's going to happen, instead of stifling innovation and losing anyway, we could have a smarter way to go about it, and those regulations would build public trust and have a predictability.
Cam, would you like to add anything on the AI side?
Yeah, maybe just a few kind of learnings from AI and AI regulation. There's maybe 3 ways that countries have looked at regulating AI. So one is just like let it ride and then litigate after. You know, I guess that's one way of regulating. The second is to try and regulate globally. So to say we're gonna have one overarching like AI regulation, and then the third is to regulate by specific domain. I think the places that have done it best, and what I say is like we actually have more AI regulation than we think, because we already regulate software in very specific domains, and it's kind of easier to build on top of that. What we have found is that the regulate this overarching piece is a little tough in a fast-moving space where setting a threshold, the version of 34 qubits in machine learning land, X number of flops. Also became ridiculous, a month later after a different algorithm came out, or, different capacities were able to be built below that threshold. So it didn't, this kind of moving target in a world where something was moving as fast as AI is, wasn't really that helpful versus saying, in this domain, this is the expectation. Like we already regulate how software can be deployed in health. We can do the same thing there. We've already, we already regulate it in critical industries where we can just update regulations there rather than trying to regulate something globally. We're trying to regulate, a social network and an AI for a power plant. Trying to do that all together is pretty difficult. And one thing Barry mentioned there, like regulation can be helpful when it provides certainty. And in many cases, the attempt to regulate everything globally has provided more uncertainty than certainty. The last piece I'd say is just, ultimately, if you, in a world where, especially in AI and machine learning, people are very mobile and companies are mobile. If you create too many regulations, the company's just going to move, or the people are just going to move somewhere else, and then you don't have any ability to regulate them anyways. So I think, thinking about a very, very strong industrial base and having world-leading companies in your country is a way of regulating. And you want to be able to do that because you end up having more influence on them, whether it's with direct regulation or not.
Okay, thank you. My next question maybe is for Catherine before we move to some audience questions here. Should governments co-develop regulation with industry, especially given that in field like quantum, governments are often the major funders at this point? Or do you think, what else should government provide besides funding to support the industry?
Yeah, thank you. On many fronts, and then just to conclude on the funding, or add on the funding, it's a long-term journey. We're still early stage with quantum. We're talking mostly about quantum computing as one of the main quantum technologies. There's a lot to be done still at the research level, at the development level, to lead to a reliable, scalable general quantum computer that will deliver useful application that can be eventually deployed in production, as we are seeing today with AI. So we're not there yet. We are super excited. That's why but we see the promise, right? But we're not there yet. There's a lot of hype, and that is not necessarily helping the industry. It is or the whole ecosystem. So what is needed is sustainable, long-term funding, and through public-private partnership is really one way to continue. Then definitely working with industry, even working with academia, because the development is done really at the intersection of all these different stakeholders, because there's so much that is done in academia to improve the qubits, to improve the algorithm, so that it needs less resources, and then altogether we can get to application sooner than expected. Industry depends on the global supply chain, and accessing components. For instance, we mentioned lasers, but also optical components, dilution refrigerators to cool some of the modalities. Some of the quantum computers need super low temperature, and these are produced in specific countries, and then we need helium to cool it down. So now back to critical minerals, and it's all connected, and not one country is completely independent. So it's a global supply chain that the industry depends on, not only the funding but also access to all the critical pieces to it, and it's a global talent pipeline. So providing trainings and because we're so close to still at the low TRL and so close to research, then scientific exchange globally is really where we need to continue to foster this, so that we can accelerate research activities. So I think that these are definitely pieces that I wanted to mention on. And back to the standardization effort, yes, we're early to define clear standards, but standardization, like regulation, it takes a long time. It's a very long process to reach consensus, and today we're at the first stage, defining terminologies, agreeing on what quantum computing is, but it's important. It gives us the opportunity to have a common language and to lead to, after defining the terminology, defining also the different layers of the stack and what is a different application, what are needed, to lead to eventually interoperability and making sure that we can also combine quantum computers with HPC centers, high performance computing centers, because quantum computing is not gonna replace classical computing tomorrow, right? They are gonna work in tandem. So there's a need also to bridge this gap and speak the same language.
Perfect. I do see one question with 4 votes here, so I'll ask now. It's generally agreed upon that large-scale quantum computers will one day be possible, but do you think they'll ever be profitable, given issues with noise reduction and scaling cost?
Okay, so great question. First, I have to tell you that, for me as a theoretical physicist, we have one rule in life. It's if it's not forbidden, it's compulsory. So the question that comes up, and sorry that I take it, such a airy-fairy perspective on it, but the first thing is a quantum computer possible? And we can't prove it isn't, therefore it is. So that's my own perspective. Now I'm going to approach it more from with the question. So is it probable? So essentially, what I'm saying is that the quantum computer is a hard technical challenge, and so is it probable? Yes. Is it probable in our lifetime? I don't know the answer. So we don't. What happens is, as we make quantum computers bigger and bigger, and actually in the past 6 months, we've had like a breakthrough every month. The Google Willow chip, the result I mentioned, that came from University of Science and Technology of China. Xanadu had a breakthrough. Xanadu is a Toronto-based quantum computing company. They just had a breakthrough. And breakthroughs in science, often papers will appear in journals like Nature or Science. So objectively, these are Nature papers and science papers that are coming out showing it. So we keep, for me, as inherently a pessimist about things, Pessimists are always pleasantly surprised. So I'm pleasantly surprised every month with the breakthrough. But we're knocking down these walls. Like if you asked me a few years ago where we'd be at today, I would have predicted we wouldn't be anywhere close to the advanced state we're at. So we're making breakthrough after breakthrough. The problem is we still have a lot of walls to knock down. And we don't know how many walls to knock down, because every time we make it better, there's some lurking physics going on that we don't fully understand. And then in physics, we just want to try to get a grasp of the laws of nature. So if things are approximately right, then we get close. But in these stupid quantum computers, you got to get gates that work, like logic operations that are 99.99% perfect. And there's a lot of physics lurking in getting things perfect as opposed to getting them good enough.
So there's a clarification. This audience asked profitable, not
profitable.
probable.
Okay, I ignore everything I just said. Okay, it's profitable. Okay, yeah. So then, but I won't take up a lot of airtime here. Yeah. So, so it's coming. Is it profitable? The question. I mean, there's a value question here, right? Like, what is the value that quantum computing can deliver? So I told you early on that quantum computing could destroy security on the internet. That's important, but not valuable. On the other hand, the value that I talked about and that Catherine was also discussing is the can we solve problems that would make a difference? So if we talk about drug discovery and, well, there's drug discovery, there's material development, there's also optimization problems and various others. So we do have examples, and there are various consulting firms that have written documents about this. Take it with a grain of salt. But they kind of assign the value. And so if we can get the quantum computers up to the scale, and we don't know when it's going to reach that scale, and then we're able to, and let's just focus on drug discovery, antibiotics, whatever, and we discover them faster, and we discover them cheaper, and we're able to simulate what they can do, then yes, it's profitable. But is it? I don't know when.
Okay, next question. Prime Minister Carney mentioned that both quantum and AI as areas of policy priority. Given the steep learning curve for these technologies, what would you recommend G7 leaders focus on in any quantum discussions? I'll say quantum and AI.
Maybe Cam.
Cam, you're up.
Yeah, again, I got no recommendations for quantum. No, I can again just talk about what we've learned in AI. So one big thing is just broad-based literacy, incredibly important. If you look at every technology, every industrial revolution, anything like this, the places that diffuse knowledge into society fastest are the ones that end up winning. So we really focus at AMII. A big part of what we focus on is broad-based AI literacy from like K to 12. We just ran a pilot in the province, gone from 50,000 K to 12 students on core AI literacy. We do it at the university level, on the workforce readiness level, on the business and executive level as well. So literacy really vital. I think it's going to be the same thing. As people are using the kind of methods of quantum going forward, people literate and understanding how to use those things are going to be really, really important. So we think that's one big thing is diffusion. The second part, and I think that Quantum City and you guys are working on as well, is at times when a new technology comes out, businesses need a bit of hand-holding to be able to move forward in them. So we do a lot of hand-holding, both on getting talent in, on help getting companies to have meaningful acceleration, like meaningful impact from projects, and they have their feet under them and are able to go from there. Those are two things just as far as this broad-based adoption that we've really learned are vital in AI, and I think will be similar in quantum.
Okay, and I'll just add to that. So one reason I'm excited to be here, and it's in the G7 context, and I mentioned about the difficulties with the export regulations, the Wassenaar arrangement and all that. It's really hard in an emerging dual-use technology to be able to work together. So there aren't that many people around who know the field. We need students, we need employees, we need investors, we need all that kind of stuff. And right now, as Canada, we face barriers even getting the tech from the US. So if I had a message to the G7 team, it's let's find, at least within the G7, let's try to break down the barriers. If there's some way that we can work collaboratively in a trusted way with unbroken supply chains to build things, unhindered mobility of talent. Within the G7, that would be a breakthrough. One of the tasks I do is I co-lead the Canada-France Quantum Alliance, which is really interesting. It's called CAFCA for short, so it's a memorable name. And so with CAFCA, we're developing with France the France-Canada linkage, and even a binational effort is actually a struggle to develop because there's all kind of barriers. So my plea in the G7 is not just for quantum or AI, but in all emerging dual-use tech, let's find ways to trust each other, to have unfettered supply chains, unhindered mobility.
Yeah, I want to echo what you just said, Barry. And this is really an opportunity for anticipatory science diplomacy and really bringing the different stakeholders together at the same table to look at different angles on what are the risks and the opportunities and have a dialogue, right? And where can we work together? How can we collaborate? And you mentioned the different pieces that are choke points and try to lower the barriers there. One place that we can all work together is on global challenges, on the United Nations have defined clear goals for sustainable development goals by 2030 with clear targets. We are behind. We're not getting there. And how can emerging technologies, AI, quantum, and other emerging technologies can help accelerate these goals? And how can we all work together, the G7 leaders and beyond, to reach these goals or at least get closer? And this is one thing that is very close to my heart, and I think very close to the Open Quantum Institute and the global community of practice that we are growing together. And Canada has this opportunity to be one of the champions here to advance on these global challenges.
So I heard a lot about international collaboration. Next question is interesting. Investing in quantum, AI, and emerging tech is a key to positioning Canada for future prosperity. What things could be done to ensure benefits accrue to Canada rather than outside parties?
I can chime in. So again, what we've seen in AI, we're really bad at being customers. So there's three things in Canada that I think are a challenge when it comes to commercialization of AI and commercialization of technologies in general. It's customers, capital, and compute. And we'll pin compute for a second. I talked about that one before. When you look at, I work with a deep tech fund in the Bay Area, the speed that they move at and the amount of capital that they'll deploy early into new technologies is far faster, far larger, and far more aggressive than what we do here in Canada. And to have new technologies move forward, it needs to have that risk capital earlier. And the biggest one that I think that we are really bad at is being customers of our own stuff. I can give you an example of a company I'm an investor in. They're used by the military of pretty much every Western nation. They're used by Google, Facebook, Instacart. You can go on and on. They are not used by the Canadian military or the Canadian government in any way. And I'll agree mostly, but slightly disagree with the earlier panelists that said, I don't want to have the Canadian government buy a worse version of Microsoft Word, the Canadian version of Microsoft Word, just to buy from Canada. Or I hadn't heard this before about dual use of having an aircraft hangar in a wedding venue, and decisions being made that way. Absolutely best value for taxpayer dollars, what we should be going for. But we have a large number of procurement rules that end up preventing us from buying from our own. And this cascades our own ability to grow our own industry. Yes, I got one person excited about this. 2, 3. All right, awesome. Everybody, will count that as an applause from everyone. The math on it, I'm just gonna finish off on this because I think this is vital. So as an example, they just got so their largest competitor out of the United States just got sole sourced a contract, and I'll make the math easy and say it was for $1 million, but it was for more than that. So let's just break down what that looks like for a Canadian startup. So $1 million, about 25 to 40% of that revenue would have gone into R&D. So that's $200,000 to $400,000 of less R&D in Canada, less patent development, less IP, less competitive. Another, $200,000 to $400,000 goes into generating new customers. In this case, they end up every about $50,000, they land a new customer for about $250,000. So this is like another $1 million worth of revenue that didn't get generated by a Canadian company that would continue to grow here, continue to build better technology, continue to be better aligned with Canadian interests. And this cycle goes on and on and on. So this $1 million thing is like a $10+ million negative impact on the Canadian economy, on our ability to grow our own domestic capacity. And this is the type of thing we have to get out of. They will have happily competed in open competition. They always win against this competitor in open competition. But for some reason, we decided not to do that here. And that is the biggest, like close to zero cost thing of just getting out of our own way on procuring from Canadians and Canadian companies. Not the worst version, but just keeping things on equal footing.
Anything to add from Barry or Catherine?
Maybe I'll just slip in, benefit for all Canadians. So in addition to, there's CAM's economic advancement story and generating value. There's also the all Canadian question. And so, I mean, this is kind of textbook stuff, multi-stakeholder approaches, make sure all Canadians include First Nations, disenfranchised, et cetera. And so, just adding another aspect to it would be, in our areas, it's important to establish a multi-stakeholder group that can feed back, and somehow, in my experience, we don't do it, and it's hard to get that momentum for it. We all know it's something we need to do, but then in people's busy lives, connecting the science and technology for the benefit of all Canadians is something we're underdoing. And I know I have a passion for that, but I don't know how to get everybody else to share that.
We'll try to address one question from the audience before we go to closing question. What is the risk of not investing in quantum tech today?
Can I jump in? Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it's a very risky effort, and there are some funds. There are actually funds that are set up to invest. Quantination from France, now in the U.S. We have one here in Calgary, Chi Ventures, which is a Swiss fund. The problem is, and it's not just quantum, it's everything, that Canada punches above its weight in terms of advancing intellectual advancement. And so Cam mentioned, the Turing Prize winners, you look at the new wave of artificial intelligence, and the 3 Turing Prize winners are Canadian. And then as Cam's saying, then Canadians aren't buying the product of what's produced here. And so, and this happens again, same in quantum. I could go on and on about how many quantum advances occurred in Canada. But where are the winning stories? They're in the United States, they're in China, and they're to some extent lesser so, but still they're in Europe. We do have companies. The first D-Wave was the first startup company in quantum computing. We have Xanadu, we've got Photonic in Vancouver. We have the stories, but the big stories are not in Canada. And so the problem, if we don't invest, is, and this goes back to the profitability question earlier, in a Canadian way of looking at things, what is the profitability, do I invest? Then in say, an American setting, what's the profitability, do I invest? There's a different culture to doing it. So what do we stand to lose? Well, we stand to lose what we always lose. We have a brain drain. We aren't able to bring in the talent. And we'll be relying on other countries to supply us technology that's both for the benefit of Canadians in a positive way, and also, and the security side. How do, it's a whole dual use story. So what do we stand to lose? Everything.
Okay. On that positive note, let's go to the closing question maybe. So Cam, I'll start with you. So AI holds enormous potential, as you know, and many worry its benefits will be concentrated among a few large firms or wealthy nations. So we heard about the whole digital divide for AI and internet access. What are some key barriers, in your opinion, to broader and more inclusive adoption, and how can we overcome them? And maybe then I'll follow with Barry and Catherine. What are the risks of a quantum divide similar to what's happening in AI, and how could we prevent it? Cam, do you want to start with something?
Sure. I think I went on my rant already about this. about what's causing a little bit of the divide there. Compute's one I didn't talk as much about, and I do think this kind of large-scale infrastructure is really important. If you look at the companies, in one sense, I'm not as worried. If you look at the companies that are leading in generative AI right now, so Google, absolutely, Microsoft, absolutely. The rest are all new, like Anthropic, Mistral, Cohere here in Canada, OpenAI, they're all new. And so I would say the ability to become a new entrant in the field doesn't seem like it's impossible by any means. And then new companies are being created every day in this space. I think the part on seeing more Canadian research have a real world impact. One of the reasons that you saw these things happen, for instance, Mistral happening in France, is they had the access to compute to do it. And so, we had, I think, 256, decade-old GPUs that our research group here in Canada was using, and they had, $5 billion worth of infrastructure to build, state-of-the-art things. So that part of if we want to have more cutting-edge problems, if we want to have more people have access to this, I think we're going to have to democratize more access to compute or think about investments in that earlier. Literacy and talent creation I talked about already, and then procurement's the other one.
Yeah, sure. So lowering the barrier to access, lowering the cost is definitely one way, and then promoting more of the multi-stakeholders engagement, building awareness, promoting internship. It's not only about having access and touching the technology, but it's also bringing it closer to those who have challenges. There are interesting challenges on the domain expertise side. That's where you can also bridge the gap and make it faster for profitable application, but also making it more inclusive, including it being more inclusive also with underrepresented regions and communities, and with building awareness, providing opportunities to learn and participate in training programs. And as I said, they don't need to be physicists, they don't need to be computer scientists. They have challenges that we all together can solve, and then that promotes more inclusion.
Anything to add, Barry? No? Okay. We have about a minute left, but I'll just read the questions from the audience. So if panelists are sticking around, feel free to answer. Question was about quantum and AI, possible benefit outcomes for resource companies. Another question is, what are we doing to ensure we're not bottlenecked by insufficient electricity capacity? No other country other than China is on track to have sufficient energy infrastructure to handle quantum AI scaling. So I'll leave that with you, or, we have 45 seconds, Barry.
I'll give a 20-second answer. So on the quantum side, because it's disruptive in the sense that certain complex problems should become not complex, there's an energy win, because if you can make a hard problem easy, then the energy consumption goes down. So not enough time to elaborate, but there are energy considerations that come into play.
Right. Anything to add, Catherine?
Lower barriers, build.